Hello, and welcome to Show Me History. I'm your host, Amy Blankenship. The Mississippi River around St. Louis looked quite different 100 or so years ago. There were many large sandbars referred to as islands from north of downtown to south around Carondelet. As the river changed current, sandbars would form, catching more silt and debris over the years. They grew to be quite considerable in size. In modern days, barges dredge rivers to prevent this from occurring. But one such sandbar turned island status was Bloody Island. Bloody Island was a sandbar on the Mississippi between St. Louis on the Missouri side and East St. Louis on the Illinois side. It began forming in the 1790s. The Mississippi River had changed currents and was moving closer to the Illinois banks. By 1800, it was already a mile long and about 500 yards wide. Bloody Island was the infamous dueling ground for St. Louisans. It was a hotbed for illegal activities, not only for dueling, but boxing matches and cockfighting. The name came from decades of bloodshed on the island. Dueling was the form of private justice brought over from Europe to the New World. At this time, practically all male members of elite society owned a pair of dueling pistols. But dueling's not what you see in the movie. There's a very complex code of conduct and etiquette for aristocrats and gentlemen. The most comprehensive code dueling document and the go-to for all rules is the Irish Code Duello, established in 1777. With 26 commandments, it details all aspects of the event. The challenge to the duel must be presented at a certain time of day and never at night. The challenged has the right to choose weapons and locations. Each person may select a second that may fill in for the duelers, but they must be of the same rank, title, or social standing as the challenger and the challengee. The challenger selects the distance from which opponents will stand opposite one another. Firing begins upon signal. If after the first round everyone is still standing, apologies and begging for pardon must commence. If this does not take place, the challenged must decide how to proceed. Most likely the choice is firing at free will until someone is either wounded or killed. In the New World, dueling became a way of dealing with politics, a method to disgrace opponents and critics. Dueling was seen as an important aspect of society. If a person felt slighted or insulted, they would issue a challenge. But why Bloody Island for a dueling location? In 1822, dueling was outlawed in Missouri, and Illinois never permitted it. The island was technically not part of any state, so it was beyond the arm of the law. Large Island was dense with vegetation and trees, hiding duelers and onlookers. Present at each duel was the challenger, challengee, seconds, a witness, and sometimes a doctor. Depending on the duel, up to 1,000 audience members would line the banks of the river awaiting the outcome. Dueling was so popular among spectators that even Charles Dickens was privy to duel on Bloody Island during his visit to St. Louis. Of this he wrote, quote, "In due time we mustered once again before the merchant's tailor, and having done so crossed over the city in a ferry boat, passing on the way a spot called Bloody Island, the dueling ground of St. Louis, and was so designated to honor the last fatal combat fought there, which was pistols breast to breast. Both combatants fell dead upon the ground, and possibly some rational people may think of them as gloomy madmen on the monk's mound, that they were no great loss to the community." End quote. The first recorded duel on Bloody Island ensued in December 1810 between attorney James Graham and Dr. Bennett Farrar. Graham accused a friend of Farrar's of cheating at cards. Farrar, acting in his friend's honor, challenged Graham to a duel. Graham was severely injured and later died. Probably the most famous duel to occur on the island was between Thomas Hart Benton and Charles Lucas. A vicious court battle between the two had left them enemies. This resulted in years of spats. At one point, on election day, Lucas said that Benton could not vote because he had not paid his taxes. Benton called Lucas an insolent puppy. Lucas then challenged Benton to a duel. On August 12, 1817, the two men met at 6 a.m. on Bloody Island. Using pistols, they distanced themselves 30 feet apart. At first shot, Lucas was shot in the throat, and Benton was hit in the knee. Benton agreed not to continue and insisted on a rematch. A month later, Benton heard rumors that he had rigged the duel and challenged Lucas to another. On September 27th, the two men met again. This time, Lucas was shot in the chest and killed. The last known duel on the island happened on August 26, 1856. At this point, the island had attached itself to the Illinois side. Known as the Duel of the Governors, Benjamin Gratz Brown and Thomas Reynolds met at dawn to duel. Brown was the editor of the Daily Missouri Democrat, and Reynolds was the U.S. Attorney in St. Louis. They had a disagreement on emancipation. Brown used his newspapers to write defaming editorials about Reynolds, and Reynolds saw this as an attack on his character and challenged Brown to a duel. Brown accepted the challenge and chose rifles as the weapon, firing at 80 feet. Reynolds, being nearsighted, declined. After a year of Reynolds ridiculing Brown as a coward, another duel was arranged. This time, the weapons were muzzle-loaded pistols at 12 yards. Upon first fire, Brown was shot in the leg. Satisfied with the wound, Reynolds ended the duel. Reynolds became Lieutenant Governor of Missouri in 1860. In 1870, Brown became governor. Aside from the horrid activity of dueling, Bloody Island was also a threat to the St. Louis waterfront. The island was growing, and the distance between the island and the levee was growing smaller. If no action were taken, St. Louis would be left without a waterfront, and effectively ending the city's livelihood. In 1833, the city of St. Louis commissioned John Goodfellow to plow up the growing sandbar. Using a team of oxen and spending $3,000, they discovered this project was a failure. The river continued to move away from St. Louis. After this feeble attempt, John Johnston, mayor, asked the federal government for assistance. General Charles Gratiot, chief of the Army Corps of Engineers, visited St. Louis. He devised a plan to divert water flow between Bloody Island and the Illinois shore. The water would erode Bloody Island and another island further south, and deepen the port waters of St. Louis. The job was initially assigned to Henry Shreve, the superintendent of the Western Rivers. He began work in 1836, but was unable to devote further time to the project. Gratiot passed the assignment along to a young lieutenant by the name of Robert E. Lee in 1837. Lee proposed constructing 2 dams, one at the top of Bloody Island and one at the southern shore. Construction began in 1838 on the southern dam. 2,500 feet long, the dam was completed in June. By October of that year, more than 700 feet of the island had been eroded. The proposed dam on the north end was never built. There were no more funds available from the federal government, and because a landowner near the dam filed an injunction against Lee, stating his properties were decreasing, it's just as well because Lee's plan proved to eradicate both Bloody and Duncan Islands. The change of the river current caused Bloody Island to merge with the Illinois shoreline. By 1865, the island had connected to the mainland, so much so that houses were built on land and supported nearly 800 people. By the turn of the century, the remains of the island were home to rail yards and the base of Eads Bridge. To today, the island is part of the Illinois shoreline, and it's barely visible. It's covered in railroad tracks and vegetations. If you look on Google Maps, you can see just a slight bump jutting out north of Front Street in East St. Louis. Thank you for joining me today. You can find me on the website at showmehistorystl.com, on Twitter at showme_history, or on Facebook, Show Me History STL. Until next time, I'll see you in the loo.